I was in labor with Christopher for 55 hours before we came to the point of needing a C-section. The majority of this time did not concern me. Babies come when they come, and first labors are notoriously long since our bodies haven't done this before, so there's a lot to figure out. When we realized, though, that he wasn't going to come of his own volition, and my body just wasn't figuring it out, we accepted that a C-section was our fate. At that point, I finally got the epidural, and since I could no longer feel anything, I promptly fell asleep. I awoke briefly to see my baby presented to me over a blue screen, and then sent my husband with the baby and again fell asleep. Though it wasn't the way that I had imagined, my waiting was done. In the meantime, my husband's wait was just beginning. Alex went with Christopher while I was being sewn up, and so we were apart for the first time in many days. He wasn't sure what to expect, and the fact that he knew me, but he didn't know this squalling, squishy little thing, meant he would have really rather been there to take care of me, but I had sent him to go with the baby before I passed out, and so he was kindly listening to his drugged, exhausted wife. Eventually, we were all rolled into a dark room about 5 a.m. We'd been up for 2.5 days, and yet there Alex waited awake, sitting between a sleeping, sewn-up me and this fragile, red-faced boy that we'd been waiting for. He sat there for several hours awake, waiting. What does one do? In the midst of all that waiting that had been, in the midst of all the waiting that was in those moments, what does one do? We all have our stories of waiting. Whether it's a birth, a beginning, or an ending, or a death, or maybe it's all of those things wrapped up into one, we all know what it is to wait, to catch our breath with anticipation, to fear, to wonder, to lose patience, to rest in silence. Remember our year of being out of the sanctuary? Such a long wait we had to come home again, such a wondering about what it all would look like. And then the press of all our souls together as we came home again. All of that anticipation, and then the explosion of joy as we entered this space and began this chapter of our life together, the fulfillment of all that we'd waited for so long. So we all wait for things big and things small. And so here and now today, our waiting season begins in earnest. But there's so much that is all happening at the same time today that we need to be careful and intentional about seeing and appreciating all of those various things. Firstly, today is New Year's Day. The first day of Advent is the beginning of the church year, so Happy New Year. This is the time when we move out of ordinary time and into the more active part of the Jesus narrative. Advent, this season of waiting and preparation, leads to Christmas, when Christ is born into the world, which leads to Epiphany, when Jesus' message starts spreading to more and more people, which leads to Lent, during which he encounters many trials and opposition, which leads to Easter, when he is killed and then resurrected, which leads to the Ascension, when he goes to sit at the right hand of the Father, which leads to Pentecost, when God sends the Holy Spirit to be with us for always. After Pentecost, we start this time that we ended last week, the ordinary time, when we hear the stories of the parables and the miracles and the teachings that Jesus offered us. So we're about to restart the story again in a very active way. So the church fathers who developed the calendar of the church year were wise. They knew that with all that is to come in this story of Jesus, we needed to make ourselves ready. We needed to not just jump in without any preparation. We needed to be intentional about waiting for the birth of Christ, to learn what that anticipation means, to say, I'm going to make my soul ready for the light of the world to come into it. It is wise to spend this Advent and every Advent thankful that we've been given time to make ourselves ready. He's getting ready to be baptized. It's a good sound. Also notable today is that during the coming year, we're going to walk through the Gospel of Mark together. Last year, we did the Gospel of Matthew. Next year, we'll do Luke. But this is Mark's year, and he tells his story with his own unique style. Being the shortest of the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we intersperse John in with all of those because John tells the story differently than Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. Mark is often seen as a clipped gospel, sort of a concise, no-frills gospel. He's only 16 chapters long, whereas Matthew is 28 chapters and Luke is 24. He skips the birth of Jesus entirely and dives right in at the baptism of Jesus when he's already an adult. Mark tells a lot of the stories about Jesus healing people and relays a lot of the parables. Interestingly, the portion of Mark we heard today is from chapter 13, the last chapter of the gospel before the section on his death and resurrection began. So in some ways, we're starting at the end, even though there's something new that's beginning. Now, that's nothing new for current-day Christians because we know the story that brought us here. Even if we don't realize we know the story, we do. We know the story of Jesus deep down. And so as we start this new year in the church, we start with an even greater anticipation of what's to come because we know the good news that's coming. We know about the roller coaster we're about to strap ourselves into that will take us through a miraculous birth, an incredible rise in influence. We know that those who have power will hate him and fear him and will plunge us down into the depths when they plot his death and then succeed in their plot. And we know that he will return 3 days later and make us redefine all that we've ever known about hope and love because he'll show us the true meaning of hope and love. We know all of that. We know this story. And knowing all of that means that we have this special responsibility right now during this season of waiting and preparation. We have to step outside the culture we're in and focus on the here and now, focus on the waiting itself. In the depths of that waiting is where our hearts will yearn for Jesus. Not just yearn for Christmas that's coming, not just yearn for the stories and the carols and the goodwill toward men, but our hearts will yearn for Jesus. So the more that we can find a way to exist in the here and now today, imagine how we will be able to live in the here and now of Christmas when he's actually here. Imagine the richness of letting Christmas just slow down. Don't we all get caught up right now in the parties and the shopping and the decorating already? I'm with you too. I ordered my Christmas cards 3 weeks ago. I love it. It's because we all, though, just have a hard time with the idea of waiting. That's why here in the church, we're invited to do something different. We're invited to just breathe, to anticipate, to live in the waiting period. This is a pregnant time of waiting, a time when, if we slow down, each day's joys will be that much deeper until the birth of Jesus becomes the most profound joy we could ever know. Thank goodness the church fathers gave us this time. We need this time to slow down so that we can notice the things that make us ready for Jesus to come among us. Now, Jesus himself is talking to us in the gospel lesson we heard today about this readiness, though it's not about his own birth, obviously, since it's him doing the talking. But he's talking about these specific themes, noticing, staying alert, being awake, being watchful. He's actually warning the people to be ready for the destruction of the temple that is forthcoming and the persecution of those who follow him. He's warning them that false prophets will arise, so take caution. He wants them to understand that many things will happen before the Son of Man will return in his glory. But there will be signs, and so we must sit up and take notice so that we will be ready for Jesus to come. So the message of being prepared in this lesson, even though it's pretty apocalyptic in its tone and warnings, is not just about the end times. It's about beginning times too, which is why the church chose it to be the gospel for New Year's Day. From the fig tree, learn its lesson, the gospel says. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. This simple instruction is one of the most useful when we think about waiting and preparation. The disciples didn't have clocks to look at to say when to do what. They didn't have a meteorologist to tune into to tell them when the warm weather was coming. They had to look for the signs in their world to know when summer was coming. In the same way, Jesus is saying, open your eyes. Notice what is happening in the world around you, and it will tell you the tale of what's to come. Are you ready for what's to come in the world? Are you making yourself ready for Jesus to come? What might it mean for you to slow down your life this holiday season? To wait, anticipate, to prepare. Which is to say, didn't the turkey taste that much better this weekend because you waited all day to have it? The final thing that is special about our life today is that we are celebrating baptisms. New Christians who will come into the fold of the faith community and by extension come into the faith community of the whole wide world. This gathered body will make vows to uphold your children in their life of faith today. Isn't that fantastic? It means that when they get a bit older and they know about Santa and they know they want presents and everything in the world is telling them this year to worship at Toys R Us, you guys can come here. And this community will tell them the story of Jesus. They can be in the Christmas pageant when they're older. And they can learn about what it means to get the very best gift of all in Jesus' birth. They can learn here, unlike any place else, the value of waiting, of being still, of preparing their souls for good news. It will make their lives deeper and richer, and this community will support you in that. This community will hold you up, and they will love your kids, and that's a miracle in this world today. Don't we all want our children to have those gifts of peacefulness, especially in this ridiculously fast-paced world? Did you notice that America just skipped Thanksgiving this year, that on November 1st we went straight to Christmas from Halloween? We can do more than that here. We can do more than that in the church. We can give our kids a bigger picture than that. We can teach them to watch with anticipation, to wait with intentionality, and to live in the joyfulness of that waiting, because the waiting is what makes the arrival so much sweeter. And so it is with us here and now. Let us embrace the waiting season that we enter today, so that when our wait is through, and Jesus is born into the world, our souls will be able to sing a song of joy that we never even knew was in us. Amen.